what exactly the team's working on. And so, we'll have kind of the consultant and the builder that we're talking about as we go on today. And I'll be talking about a bunch of this in abstract, but also be talking we've kind of been going through this journey. It's kind of 4 infrastructure teams within Datadog. So I'll also be talking about some kind of concrete examples of kind of what this has looked like. So real briefly, my name's Sean. I'm an engineering director at Datadog. I run the Cloud Foundations group. So my team's responsible for all the kind of management and best practice and ownership of kind of the base cloud else it's built on top of. Outside of work, I'm mostly trying to keep these two alive. It's a pretty full-time thing, but it's fun. And so, another thing that's worth, whoa, that was fun. Speaking right here is, I'm talking about the 2 modes of, consultant and builder, but it's not a binary, right? It's a spectrum, and at different points, it'll make sense for you at different times. About things in kind of a lot of those terms where, it's not always going to be the same everywhere. That's how we kind of try and think about things. So let's start with some definitions, right? When I say consultant, what do I mean, right? Obviously, when we're talking about a team inside of a company, they're not literally. So I guess often you may hire people in this mode as well. I'm more talking about what is their interactions with the wider organization look like, and what is the name look like. When you're talking about consultants, you're talking about a lot of one-on-one interactions, right? Like, individual team, talking to individual people, individual teams, processing individual tickets, right? The team is generally going to be composed mostly of generalists, right? You're going to have a lot of people wearing lots of different hats on a given day, and a lot of the work is going to be very reactive and responsive, right? It's not going to be a lot of working on big multi-quarter efforts. It's going to be a lot of just responding to the immediate needs of the folks that you're supporting. And conversely, when I'm talking about builders, I'm talking about much more something that looks like almost like an internal product or platform team, right? You're much more product customer type interaction, where it's much more of a scaled interaction, right? You're generally providing a common solution that people use in a more off-the-shelf kind of way. It's not necessarily built in a bespoke way for each user or group. It's going to be scaled, right? It's a lot more self-service type things, right? You're going to see a lot more specialists in the team. We'll kind of get into some of kind of why that is in a little bit. And often you're generally going to be dealing with scale, right? Like, a lot of what drives you to push towards this is the fact that, you're going to have one-on-one interactions supporting, 5, 6, a dozen teams. You can't do that with 300 teams, right? At different points, both in kind of the life of the wider organization and of your own team, you end up wanting to be at different places along the spectrum. You also end up operating at different points in the spectrum, and sometimes those, and that'll be kind of a lot of what we end up talking about. So when we think about this, how do we think about where should we be landing, or where do we want to be landing on the spectrum, right? And I generally kind of think about this in terms of organizational maturity, right? Is usually kind of the biggest driver on a lot of this. And we'll talk a bit about kind of what that means, right? So you think about this at kind of maybe the immature end of this being, to be clear, this isn't necessarily any kind of judgment in that term, just how that goes. Think about, an early stage startup, right? In this kind of context, right, you're optimizing for flexibility over efficiency, right? Like think pre-product market fit kind of situations where you haven't gotten traction yet. You're trying out lots of different things to see what's going to click. It doesn't matter how efficient it is because nobody's using it. What matters most is that you have that agility to try the different things so you can find the thing that does work, that does get traction, right? So then, right, you don't know what you're building, right? It doesn't make sense to invest 3 years in building a platform if you don't even know that you're going to be in business in 3 years, right? On the flip side, like, if you're going to be trying different things to try and get things to click, being reactive actually can be really is what's needed, right? Like you need to be able to very quickly respond to a changing context, a changing opportunity, changing needs, right? Also in this context, generally speaking, you're going to be using a lot of tools, right? Like Generally speaking, you're not going to be in a position where, you're already kind of struggling to survive no matter what you're doing. You don't have time to go build the thing that already exists, right? So you're going to be much more kind of taking off the shelf tools and trying to adapt them to your needs. They're like building giant platforms from scratch or building custom stuff that isn't like super relevant to the niche that you're trying to solve, right? At the more mature end of things, you can think of this maybe as a well-established company that has like a very well-established kind of customer base. Maybe it's more of like a governmental organization, things like this, where the problems that you're solving are very well understood and well established and are hopefully likely going to be sticking around for a long time. So in this context, you're going to be much more on efficiency and over flexibility, right? Like you can make those investments and almost have to make those investments, knowing that like, okay, if we're at this scale solving this problem today, it's going to be 2, 5, 10x that in 3 years. We need to start the thing today to be able to do the thing in that time, right? You have much more well-defined needs, right? If you've already kind of gotten that traction, or you're working within some kind of regulatory or legislative framework, like it's well-established, it's well-known. Again, the world changes, but generally speaking, like if you're going to make some bets, you can bet on that for a long time. This means that it can make sense to do those investments, and you can optimize in different ways. And often it's going to make more sense for you to do a lot more custom stuff. Either you might be operating at scale where just the off-the-shelf stuff doesn't work, or a lot of times when you're looking at that kind of trade-off of efficiency and flexibility, often where you're getting that efficiency is tailoring things to exactly kind of your needs and the trade-offs that you can make, as opposed to something that's more generic that has to be more flexible, right? No, sorry. I don't know why this is going through this again. My apologies. So, something has gone very strange with my presentation. I apologize. And my speaker notes are gone. Okay, cool. Sorry. We'll ignore that. So, kind of depending on what you're looking to do, and kind of the context around you, you can kind of start getting a sense of like where you might want to end up, right? I have a kind of caveat here of something that's kind of implied in certainly the title of the talk, but even just generally how you're talking about this in terms of like, going from immature to maturity implies that you're always going in one direction. And often, like more often than not, that is probably true. But it is worth mentioning that that's not actually always the direction you want to be going in, right? There are situations where, let's say your business is going through a pivot, or there's a major legislative change or some other major context has changed around what you're doing. It may actually make sense to move back towards the kind of more consultant model because the certainty that you previously had isn't there anymore, and you need to optimize more for the flexibility. So just a thing worth keeping in mind. So what does all this actually look like in practice? So we talk about kind of some of both on time of Datadog and kind of transition that's happened within the infrastructure team there. So we go back in time. The year was 2018. This is kind of like all the different lines of business and products we offer. In 2018, at this place, so kind of the main kind of dashboard product that most people know has been around for a while. We had just launched logs and APM. Those still weren't even necessarily even really getting traction yet. So we're still almost in that kind of product market fit space for a lot of things. Very much optimizing for that flexibility. Sense of kind of scale. So, at that point, the company was about 1,000 people. We were operating, low thousands of hosts, I think. We're on a single provider in a single region, AWS and US East 1, like 2/3 of the internet. And so at this point, we were very much self-owned, right? At that time, the app wasn't a monolith, but you didn't need to look too hard to figure out what was the monolith. So there was a lot of that kind of mode to things. Similarly, teams each kind of had their own kind of major silos and worked in a very end-to-end kind of way. So like Basically, the infrastructure product very much had their own stack and build and release process and tooling. The logs team had their own build stack and build process and tooling, API, so on, right? And so the role of infrastructure at that time was mostly kind of to be available as subject matter experts and to provide some kind of bespoke tooling, but there wasn't really any centralized ownership of most things, right? It's really owning kind of their own operation at the end, which had lots of benefits, and again, optimized for that flexibility, but also meant that I think there was maybe some redundancy to that. And again, like in as much as there was a centralized organization, it was more kind of coming in and supporting the things that the other teams were driving. Operations in a lot of cases were, much more, scripts getting run from people's laptops or manual operations than, large kind of orchestrated systems or kind of more self-managed automation. It was a bit of the Wild West. As part of that kind of you build it, you run it model, teams basically could use the tooling that made the most sense for them. Again, it's a flexibility thing and be able to have that agility that makes sense and provide a lot of value. But also, again, from an infrastructure org perspective, it also meant, there was, we couldn't just tell everybody you have to use the thing and do it this way. There was a lot of adapting to all the different modes that teams were kind of working within. So you might imagine there was a fair amount of firefighting and it was a very kind of reactionary kind of mode. And then even within that, the infrastructure org generally, certainly had some things that were responsible for, but at that point, it was much more getting called in by other teams to help out when things kind of went beyond their depth, right? So again, it was a lot of, kind of responding to these kind of wider needs, addressing that flexibility, but also when you're operating that kind of mode, you can't really get too far out ahead of your skis because a lot of it's not even in your control, right? And this sounds maybe scary and terrible. And there were points at that time where you might ask me, I might have said that. But really in hindsight, while it was stressful, that was actually what the business needed and what actually I think was the right kind of optimization, right? If we were trying to build giant platforms to make all this more efficient, it would have just slowed everything down and optimized for the wrong thing at the business at that time. Man. Oh, okay, cool. So let's fast forward and let's say, what does this actually look like today, right? Now we have, instead of just those kind of 3 lines of business, we have tons of things. We're now also sprinkling AI everywhere, which requires completely different types of systems and operational modes. Additionally, kind of scale-wise, now we're at about over 6,000 employees, tens of thousands of pods, and that's also spread across 3 different providers in over 7 regions, right? So just the scale and complexity is several orders of magnitude different, right? So you see a lot more things that are much more in that kind of builder mode, right? A lot more of the work that my teams are doing are much more kind of longer term infrastructure projects in the sense of these are large multi-quarter, if not multi-year efforts to kind of build things that let us do things at scale very efficiently. A lot more of the team are deep subject matter expert specialists. A lot of that both comes from, on one hand, we can have confidence that we are going to have the need for a long time, right? We're not going to just pivot and have this really deep subject matter expert that is no longer relevant. That's much less of a concern. But also, a lot of times, again, when you're operating at that kind of scale, being able to do, really dig really deep and do really fine optimizations can have a really big impact, right? Or if you're just solving problems that there isn't a good off-the-shelf answer for, you kind of need that specialization, right? Boundaries, much clearer, and there's a lot more centralized ownership, right? And kind of that earlier time, there was a lot of kind of shared responsibility, shared ownership, right? There was no team that necessarily owned a thing. Just everybody kind of agreeing to play nice and it kind of working out. But as you have that growing size and that growing complexity, that gets harder and harder. You see a lot more kind of clear kind of boundaries around things and ownership. There's a lot more guardrails around things. Again, some of it's a bit trade-off between kind of flexibility and efficiency. Teams do still have very wide latitude in what they can choose, but there's, that trade-off equation is a bit different, right? The bar for what can go into production is just way higher, right? Yeah, we operate in a lot more regulated environments, and the consequences of things going wrong is a lot. we're certainly thankfully not in any like safety critical situations, but still, like if it goes down, there's a lot of things that stop happening. And so we have to kind of have, make sure that take that responsibility seriously and make sure this is in place. And the growth rate is also a thing. So a lot of times when we are building these things, we have to kind of build it planning for that, knowing that, just if we're building for today and we're at the limit of that, well, that's not going to work in a year or two, right? And kind of keep up with that. And so with that, the timescales are also much longer, right? It's much more building towards things in the, not distant future, but, at least a few quarters out. And it's one of those things of, basically, if teams want to be, accomplishing something, a quarter or two from now, the infrastructure has to be in place for that now, right? And so having to kind of be ahead of things like that. And that's generally working pretty well. Like, again, kind of different trade-offs. So let's think about maybe another way, so kind of given that background, let's maybe, think about a little bit another way to look at, are you in the right place, right? Before we kind of talked about some of the structural things around the wider context of what you might want to think about if you're in the right place, but there's another kind of feedback thing I've learned to pay attention to with this. Kind of where's the pain coming from and what is the pain like? And particularly the pain of what problems are happening that you don't have great solutions for, right? On one end, if you feel like you're drowning and like can't even keep up, never mind, or like struggling to keep up, never mind, get ahead of things, like that's probably a sign that you probably need to move more towards kind of the builder end of things. On the flip side, if you're looking so far out that you're not even sure that somebody's going to use the thing that you're building, that's probably a sign to move a bit the other way, right? It feels like you're doing a lot of big speculative bets. Again, that's probably a sign that to maybe move back. If you feel like you can't even just get through the ticket backlog that you have, never mind think about what building something new looks like. Again, it's maybe a sign to move. And then kind of the happy, like you're probably in the right territory pain is, the problems you're working on are solving problems that you feel acutely, right? Like you have a very clear picture of why the thing you are building is needed because you feel the lack of it. But again, you're not drowning and you're not being wildly speculative. Cool. So, and for reference, like we tend to end up here. I've found different organizations tend to just have a natural place in the spectrum they end up. We just tend to end up there, but you find your own way. So let's say you have a team or a situation where you've kind of thought about things with this, and you decide you're in a different place than where you want to be. How do you go about changing and getting to a better place, right? It's kind of a slow way to get there, and a fast way to get there, and they both can be good. It just kind of depends on the situation and the opportunities that you have ahead of you. So the slow way thing is like just a continuous improvement approach, right? Or a very gradual change, right? Have lots of small wins over time, lots of small shifts, but there's never one big bang moment where like you're in the new world, right? You're just incrementally, ever so often, getting towards where you think you need to be. The good this is very, relatively low risk. Obviously, you have a bit of like inaction is itself as a choice, and often can come with quite a bit of. But like the action itself isn't introducing a lot of new risk. The trade-off there is it's generally going to be a very hard, if not impossible, to predict timeline. Kind of definitionally, you're kind of optimizing for reducing risk as opposed to kind of like delivery on a. And so you're just kind of making that trade-off. The other thing that is nice about this is it allows you kind of learn and adapt as you go, right? Like kind of intrinsic to this approach is lots of opportunity for iteration and feedback and learning and adjusting course, right? Like if you're taking lots of small steps, and you realize you took a step in the wrong direction, it's not a big deal to take the next step closer towards you're going, right? So it lets you kind of optimize and fit as you go in a very low drama kind of way, right? The other way is a bit of kind of jump and there we go. I'll pass in a minute. There we go. Jump and kind of build the right? Which obviously is scary and a bit risky. But it can be high reward, right? If you're in a position where you have to make a staff function change, and like let's say it's a survival or just like it's unlikely you're going to have the kind of willpower to sustain a long change over a long time, this might be the way you need to do it, right? It's nice in that, again, like, you can have very high impact very quickly, but the big trade-off here, aside from the risk, is I guarantee you will have a lot of cleanup work to do, right? Like you'll check the box, you'll be on the other side, but there's gonna be a lot of mess to clean up. And like, if you have a very full definition of done, often this can take just as long, if not longer, than the slow approach, but might be what makes sense, right? So let's talk a bit about kind of what these can look like, right? The slower approach, it's gonna be a lot like, a train, get it moving, right? Like very, very slow at first, but at each turn of the wheel is a little bit faster, and eventually you're going, really faster in a very different place, right? So to that end, it's really important to think about, what are the small incremental wins that you can have along the way, both in terms of motivating your team and having them be happy, but also in terms of like credibility, right? In terms of delivering things that are actually useful to users and building up that buy-in with, it's definitely critical to be to focus and have a certain amount of skepticism about what you're signing up for and what you're taking on as part of this, right? Since you don't have that urgency kind of forcing that focus, it can be a bit easy to kind of go off on side projects and get lost in the weeds. So it's really important to kind of keep that critical eye towards things and keep that focus over that long term. Again, it's kind of important to just accept that the amount that you don't how long this it's going to look like at the end. In some ways, that's a feature, but it's also scary and hard to sell. So, it's a thing that this can be an expensive approach. Now, in some ways, it sounds like it might be kind of cheaper because you're working remotely. Into it, often it can get expensive in that, generally speaking, the types of teams you're doing this for, like, you can't stop doing what you were doing while you're changing, right? Like, you have to kind of work in both modes for a while. And the longer you do that, the more expensive that gets, right? What expense here means can take lots of different forms, but it's a thing to think about. Another thing that's worth thinking about in this mode is it's a lot of like exercising a muscle, right? Like generally speaking, you're going to be continually trying to make change, and it's probably something you haven't been doing a ton of, and that's something that's hard and uncomfortable, at least to me, like exercise. And it's the kind of thing. The easier it gets and the bigger things you can take on, but like you kind of have to have that kind of mindset, accept the pain that comes with that. The kind of faster mode of this, again, you kind of accept that it is a bit more of a risk. If you're doing a big bang change, if you don't have that lined up right, that's gonna end poorly. I find this approach tends to work really best when there's a very clear motivating focus, right? There's a very clear thing that everything is very bought in on, that like, yes, this is the thing we need to be doing and this is the way we got to get there. So that's kind of critical for this kind of approach to work well. At the end, it's really important that you stay very clear and like as sharp on that focus as you can. Again, kind of anything you pull in is going to increase that risk. And so just keeping that focus is going to be critical to making this happen. The tension with that is you do still need to find ways to iterate and get feedback in that process. It's a lot harder here because definitionally you're working on a higher timeline, you have less room for experimentation, you have less room to try things, or just like, you might not, like, it's hard to try the new thing until you have the new thing, right? But it's still really critical to figure out how you can incorporate that as much as you can. And like I said before, like just accept that you're gonna clean up a lot, and it's messy. So let's maybe talk a little bit about kind of what this looks like in practice. So one example is kind of the cloud tooling at Datadog, right? This is an example kind of the slow approach. It's honestly a place where in this we're probably the closest to the consultant end of that spectrum. But it's a place where it's never kind of the critical issue. Like the tooling generally has always worked well enough that it's fine. It's always something that has to be working. Like we can't be in a position where we can tell teams like, hey, that old tool isn't the thing you should use anymore, but the new thing's not going to be here for 6 months. Like, that's not an option. So it is a lot more of this kind of gradual, incremental, but compounding change. Conversely, our move to Kubernetes was much more the high risk, high reward type thing, right? Basically, in 2019, we from that first region to a new region and a new provider, and we basically took that opportunity to do that big shift. Instead of trying to migrate everything all at once, we just natively built out that new environment on Kubernetes and then used that as kind of the model to get everything from there. We had that very clear goal. We had that very clear focus. There was a very clear motivation, right? Trying to get all of our existing tooling to work cross-provider was going to be a nightmare. But also the idea of migrating our existing environment to Kubernetes was scary, especially also in 2019 when Kubernetes was less well-baked. So, it kind of provided a good fit for that. The timer thing's not working. I'm not sure time, but I guess we're good. Cool, so some quick challenges. To think about here are, a thing you're going to need to deal with is mindsets and closing knowledge gaps. Basically the people that are doing the work today are not who you would hire for this kind of new mode of work, right? So you're going to think about how to transition them. I think I'm running a bit lower on time, so I'm not going to get a ton into the details here. Sorry, I optimized this a bit wrong. But yeah, the short version here is look for people who are really enthusiastic, empower them. Training and formal learning resources are great. Find opportunities to get hands-on keyboard time for folks. Fake it till you make it, right? Like the difference between knowing what you're doing and not is, as long as you're doing the thing, nobody really cares. And listen to your folks, get that feedback, kind of go with that. That move to Kubernetes I mentioned before was very much that exercise. Nobody knew how to do Kubernetes before we were doing it, so we kind of all learned as we went. That kind of before you're going to have a certain amount of skepticism going into things from the wider organization, right? People are going to have a hard time imagining what the new world looks like. They might be used to just playing from a certain book and don't want to move off of that. People may have tried this before, and it might have gone poorly. So there might be some trauma from that. Right, so some ways you can kind of get around this. Again, that incremental get wins that have impact for users and build that up over time. Find partners that maybe are more eager that you can get those early wins with and convince more skeptical people. Again, find those enthusiastic people and empower them. Get users and getting that positive feedback going. You're good there. Kind of move. Again, the Kubernetes project was a thing in that, I think there was a lot of skepticism when we were originally talking about trying to move our existing infrastructure to Kubernetes. But having this kind of clean slate environment when we were building on GCP for the first time helped us get over that hurdle, right? It felt less scary. There was less risk. We could do that, prove that we do it, and then, do the hard thing of migrating everything else. How are you going to sustain yourselves? Give me another challenge, right? You have to keep on putting out the fires that you're fighting, but also do the new thing, which sounds exhausting, right? Here, some of the answer here, throw money at it, right? Just hire more people. Not an option, but if you can, it helps. Be really critical about what you're taking on, right? There's probably stuff you're doing today that you don't actually have to be doing. Try and figure out what you can cut back or deprioritize. Streamline things as much as possible, right? You probably don't have super efficient processes. Are there things that you have to go through 8 tickets that you can boil down to 1? Or the things that you can just change how you're working that isn't necessarily building the thing? That helps. Again, find those enthusiasts and empower them. And have a flywheel effect, right? Look for the things that are burning up a lot of time, automate those first. That gets you more time to build more automation, so on. Right. And specific cases, how we dealt with this. Threw money out with the people and brought in some staff engineers from other groups to temporarily help out and get us over the hump. We have some objections, and Tavis is kicking me off, so I'm going to skip through here. And call it good. Thank you. Sorry about that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We have time for maybe 1, maybe 2 questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious. Once you went with Kubernetes, deploying Kubernetes and all 3 different providers, did you actually go with each provider's native kind of Kubernetes own engine, like AKS in Azure, EKS in AWS, or you actually kind of just went with a kind of virtual, instances approach, and where you would run and manage your Kubernetes?
We run our own fleet. Yeah, so we're running our own Kubernetes fleet. At the time, the managed offerings weren't viable for that. You maybe could today, but by that time, yeah, you had to run your own fleet. Once you start doing that, you probably don't stop.
Right on. All right, we've got time for maybe one question. Yeah.
Imagine, I expect you to target the bit between the how the actually feel like you're
Sure.
Did you feel like your existing staff were also able to transform more from a consultant philosophy to a builder philosophy after bringing in the staff engineers?
Yeah, so in that particular case, that's actually helped a lot with that mindset shift. Is the staff engineer that we brought in had a lot more of that kind of platform builder type experience. So he was able to both, kind of get into the trenches with the existing team to kind of build up that experience and also just see what needed doing. But then also help them on the ground, like through that mindset shift instead like, how do I put out this fire? How do I make fire stop starting, right? Kind of thing. Cool. With that, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Give it one up for Sean.